the family that really matters. Those 5 words popped up on my screen alongside a photo of my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, smiling brightly next to my son Daniel and her mother Vivian. Me, the woman who'd raised him, fed him, and given everything for decades, had been erased from the family equation with the coldness of someone wiping a mistake off a whiteboard. My fingers shook over the keyboard as I typed my reply. Good luck. I had no idea those 2 words would unleash a storm that would change our lives forever. An hour later, Daniel's shouts echoed through my house. "Mom, what did you do? The lawyer just called me about the house, the properties, everything." His face was pale as a ghost, his hands trembling as he showed me his phone, littered with missed calls from the bank. At that moment, I knew my revenge had begun. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled. But to understand how I reached this breaking point, I need to tell you the story from the start. My name is Margaret Hale. I'm 63 years old and I've worked like a mule my whole life to build the legacy my family took for granted. It all started when I was 16, pregnant and abandoned by my son's father selling homemade pies on the corner of my neighborhood in Seattle, Washington. With those first dollars, I bought more ingredients, more hope. Year after year, dollar by dollar, I built a small empire. 3 rental properties and a bank account most would envy. Everything changed the day Daniel introduced me to Vanessa. It was a Sunday in March, and the smell of my beef stew filled the house when I heard the click of her heels on my hardwood floor. That arrogant clack already warned me this woman would bring trouble. She appeared at my door in a tight red dress that looked like a second skin, her smile as fake as a dollar store knockoff. "So you're the mother-in-law," she said, extending a hand cold as ice, while her eyes sized me up from head to toe. "No nice to meet you or pleased to know you." She just labeled me the mother-in-law, like I was another piece of furniture in the house. Her long, perfect nails stood in sharp contrast to my callous, scarred hands, which told the story of every sacrifice I'd made for my son. Daniel, blinded by love, didn't notice the venom dripping from her every word. My son, my pride. The man I raised alone after his father ditched us when he was 8 was hypnotized by someone who already showed her contempt for me. But I chose to stay quiet and watch, never imagining I was nurturing a snake that would later bite me nearly to death. At that first dinner, Vanessa turned my dining table into a silent battlefield. "What an interesting decorating style," she remarked, eyeing my family photos with disdain. Her gaze lingered on the picture of me graduating as an accounting technician, the only formal education I could afford while raising Daniel. "This stew has such a bold flavor," she added, pushing her plate away like it was poison. Each comment was a slap wrapped in fake politeness, but I swallowed my pride and smiled, thinking time might soften her. As I served dessert, I overheard her whisper to Daniel, "Honey, does she always cook so homey? Back at Mom's, we have a chef who makes more refined dishes." Her words stabbed my heart like sharp knives. This woman didn't just dislike my cooking. She compared my modest home to her wealthy family's lifestyle. Vivian, her mother, owned a chain of upscale salons and lived in a 2-story mansion in the fanciest part of town. After they left, I sat alone clearing the plates Vanessa had barely touched. The silence in my house felt heavy, loaded with dark omens. Daniel was too caught up in his girlfriend's fake smiles to notice how she treated me. I sat in my favorite chair, the one I'd sewn his school uniforms in to afford his education. And for the first time in years, tears rolled down my wrinkled cheeks. But I was a survivor of poverty, abandonment, and loneliness. I wasn't about to let a spoiled princess make me feel worthless in my own home. Little did I know that first humiliation was just the start of a 5-year nightmare that would lead to the most radical decision of my life. The months that followed were slow psychological torture, disguised as family visits. Vanessa mastered the art of humiliating me with a smile. Every Sunday lunch, I became the target of her venomous remarks. She played the perfect daughter-in-law in front of Daniel, but turned into a viper when he wasn't looking. "Oh, dear mother-in-law, still using that cheap face cream. Look at those wrinkles," she'd say, applying her fancy imported serum in my bathroom mirror. Her words were daggers wrapped in velvet, delivered in that sweet little voice she used to manipulate my son. I gritted my teeth and kept serving food, swallowing my pride like bitter medicine. Things got worse when they announced their engagement. Daniel showed up one afternoon, eyes sparkling with joy, holding a bottle of champagne and talking about wedding plans. "Mom, I want you to be the first to know. Vanessa and I are getting married in December," he said, hugging me with the strength that reminded me of the boy he once was. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces, but I smiled and congratulated him, because that's what mothers do, swallow their pain to see their kids happy. Vanessa, of course, had other plans for me. In the weeks that followed, she started visiting alone, supposedly to plan the wedding together and bond. But the reality was far different. She'd sit in my living room like she owned the place, legs crossed, that fake smile plastered on her face, laying out the new family rules. "Look, dear mother-in-law, I know you've been alone with Daniel all these years, but things are going to change," she said one Tuesday afternoon, sipping tea from my best china. Her nails tapped the table in a hypnotic, threatening rhythm. A married woman needs her space, her privacy. There can't be a third wheel interfering in the marriage. The way she said third wheel made my blood run cold. I explained I'd never meddled in Daniel's relationships, always respecting his privacy and choices, but Vanessa had it all figured out. "Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong on purpose. It's just, well, men can be so attached to their mother's right, and that can cause issues in a marriage." Her words were like acid, corrosive and precise. The family that really matters. Those 5 words still echoed in my mind like a cruel song, the caption that Vanessa Price had posted beneath a smiling photograph of herself, my son Daniel and her mother Vivian Marlowe. I, Margaret Hale. The woman who had raised Daniel single-handedly through poverty, abandonment, and endless nights of sacrifice was cut from the frame, erased with the cold precision of a chalk mark wiped off a school board. I had replied with only 2 words: "Good luck." I knew as soon as my thumb pressed send that I had lit a match, and matches when tossed into dry kindling do not merely flicker, they roar. Within the hour, Daniel had stormed into my kitchen, pale as milk, his hands shaking with missed calls from banks and lawyers. His words had cracked the silence like breaking glass. "Mom, what did you do?" But to explain that moment, to make sense of the storm I had unleashed, I must carry you back to the beginning. The humiliation, the smoldering resentment that grew into iron determination, and finally the blazing hope that one day justice would be mine. When Daniel first brought Vanessa home, the air was thick with the aroma of beef stew simmering on the stove. That stew had been my signature for decades, a dish of survival and love. But Vanessa entered not as a guest, but as a conqueror, heels clicking across my hardwood like war drums. Her dress clung to her body like armor, her smile polished and fake, her handshake cold. She looked around the modest home I had built brick by brick, meal by meal, and dismissed it with a glance. At that dinner table, she launched her first silent assault. She mocked my decor, sniffed at my stew, whispered to Daniel that her family had chefs who cooked refined food. I endured swallowing each barb like bitter medicine. My son was too blind with love to see the venom dripping from her tongue. Vivian, her mother, owned a line of salons and carried herself like a queen. I saw immediately where Vanessa had learned her art of cruelty polished into smiles that cut deeper than knives. For 5 years, Sunday lunches turned into battlefields. Vanessa perfected the role of dutiful wife in front of Daniel, but when his back was turned, she struck like a snake. She sneered at my wrinkles, mocked my inexpensive cream while smearing imported serums on her face. She called me dear mother-in-law with a voice sweet enough to rot teeth, all while stripping my dignity piece by piece. Daniel proposed glowing with joy. I congratulated him with a smile that hid 1,000 cracks. Vanessa began visiting alone, dictating new rules that I was the third wheel, that men could be too attached to their mothers. Every word burned, but I listened in silence. Inside, resentment smoldered like hot coals. The wedding humiliated me further. I was pushed to the corners of dress shops while Vivian enjoyed the mother-daughter moments that should have been mine. On the day itself, I was ordered about like a servant shooed from photographs. Vanessa smiled beside my son in white lace while I served water to guests. Months later, Daniel came to me with papers. "Mom, if you put the properties in my name, everything will be simpler in case something happens." His voice carried love, but I recognized Vanessa's script. My pen dug my own grave that day. I signed, still believing that blood would never betray me. But betrayal had already begun. From that moment, the erosion sped up. Vanessa declared herself lady of the house, hinting that once she had a baby, my presence would be too stressful. The serpent had shown its fangs. But here is where my story takes a turn, with a new element I never thought I'd embrace: espionage. One autumn morning, after a particularly cutting insult about sending me to a retirement home, I went downtown and bought a tiny voice recorder the size of a lipstick. I tucked it into the pocket of my apron. What I captured that week was worse than any nightmare. Vanessa on the phone with Vivian plotted renovations for their house once I was gone. "We'll knock down her bedroom wall for the walk-in closet, Mom. Daniel won't question it." Vivian's laugh was sharp as glass. "Perfect, darling. That bathroom will make a lovely office." Each recording was fuel poured onto the fire already burning in my chest. My resentment hardened into iron determination. I checked Vanessa's phone one day, left carelessly on the table. "The messages chilled me, girl. I'm almost done with this mission. Daniel's completely on my side. Next step is pregnancy. Once I'm expecting she's out, it's the perfect plan." The words were undeniable. She called me the mission. My life, my sacrifices, my very motherhood reduced to a military campaign. It was no longer only about survival, it became about justice. I contacted Richard Lawson, a lawyer I trusted from a neighbor's recommendation. His calm voice steadied me. He examined the contracts I had signed under pressure and found irregularities, no cooling off period clauses, not explained clear evidence of emotional duress. He told me, "Margaret, we can fight this, but you must keep documenting. Every word, every insult, gather it like ammunition." And so I did. Each day I became a detective in my own home. My smoldering resentment became a blazing hope. Then came that fateful December afternoon. Vanessa posted the photo with Vivian and Daniel, the caption that cut me out of my own family, the family that really matters. Neighbors called horrified. My hands shook, but not from weakness, from resolve. I typed, "Good luck." Those words were not a surrender. They were the strike of a match. The legal machine roared to life. That night, as Daniel shouted in panic, demanding answers, I sat in my armchair, calm as steel. My journey from humiliation to vengeance had only begun. What they thought was my weakness was my weapon. And now, dear listener, I must ask you, if you were in my place, erased from the family you built with your own blood and tears, would you fight back, press 0, if you would stay silent, or 1, if you would rise with me? Daniel's voice still echoed in my kitchen like a storm that refused to pass. "Mom, what did you do? Why are the lawyers calling me? Why are the banks freezing everything?" I looked at him. My son, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, who now trembled like a stranger in my own home. For the first time in years, I did not shrink under his panic. I felt something new, a power surging through me, steady and unshakable, because the trap was no longer mine to fall into. The trap now belonged to Vanessa. At exactly 2:00 p.m., Daniel's phone exploded with messages and calls. The bank first, Mr. Hale, due to irregularities, accounts linked to these properties are frozen by court order. 10 minutes later, a second call from the lawyer who had handled the fraudulent transfer. Mr. Hale, serious legal errors invalidate the contracts. Daniel's face turned sheet white. His lips trembled as though he had swallowed ice. I sat in silence watching the tidal wave crash over him, and then came the final blow. Richard Lawson himself, calm and precise, informing Daniel that a lawsuit had been filed, and every asset reverted immediately to its rightful owner, me. I saw Daniel's hands shaking his phone, nearly slipping from his grip. Shock thundered through the room, rattling the very walls. This was the moment I had prepared for, the Chan Jong du Doigt, the earthquake that split the earth beneath Vanessa's perfect heels. From the living room, I heard Vanessa's laughter stop abruptly. She marched into the kitchen, still clutching her phone, her friends gone. "What's happening, Daniel?" Her voice cracked, that perfect polish slipping. Daniel snapped, "They're saying Mom can take everything back, that the contracts were void, Vanessa. What did you get me into?" Her face lost its color. For once she had no script, no smirk. That silence was more satisfying than any insult I could have thrown. For 5 years I had endured her condescension, her icy words. Now she was speechless, caught in a net she had woven herself. I pulled out the thick folder I had prepared, the one Richard had urged me to compile. "Sit down, both of you," I said, pointing to the couch where Daniel had once eaten popcorn during Saturday night movies as a boy. They sat, and I opened the folder like a general unrolling a battle map. First, the screenshot of Vanessa's messages. Next step is pregnancy. Once I'm expecting, she's out. It's the perfect plan. Daniel's face collapsed, his lips forming a wordless plea. "Vanessa, you wrote this," she sputtered. "That's not real. It's fake. Your mother. She's trying to destroy us." I reached into the folder again, drawing out the transcript of a recording. "Read it, Daniel," out loud. His voice shook as he read Daniel's like putty in my hands. "I never planned to stay with him forever. Once everything's locked in, I'll divorce him. Take half and marry someone on my level." The words hung heavy in the air, poison exposed to sunlight. Daniel looked at his wife, eyes wide with disbelief. "Vanessa, tell me it's not true." She lunged for him with crocodile tears, but I pressed a button on my phone. Her own voice filled the room, crystal clear. Daniel's like putty in my hands. The explosion had come. Truth detonated in our living room, louder than any bomb. Just when silence seemed unbearable, the doorbell rang. On the porch lay an envelope, plain no return address. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands and passed it to me. Inside was a letter typed in bold black ink. "To Margaret Hale, I have information about Vanessa Price and her mother Vivian. They used your properties as collateral for secret loans. More than you think. Check the attached documents. You are not alone in this fight." Attached were photocopies of bank slips loans totaling over $50,000 signed by Vivian but tied to my properties. For a moment, even I was stunned. Who had sent this a disgruntled employee, a banker sick of covering their tracks? Whoever it was, the evidence made our case airtight. The satisfaction that coursed through me was indescribable. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. It was the cold, undeniable truth. Cornered, Vanessa snapped. Gone was the sugary smile. She rose from the couch like a caged animal, screaming, "Fine, yes, it's true. But it's her fault this bitter old woman never knew when to step aside." Her voice was shrill, venomous, unhinged. She turned on Daniel. "You're pathetic. No ambition. I only married you for what she built." Daniel staggered back as though struck. His face crumpled, the man finally seeing the mask fall away. And I felt a rush of power unlike anything in my life. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but justice. Clean, sharp, undeniable. That night, Richard came in person with a police officer. Documents were served, contracts, voided rights restored. Vanessa was ordered to collect her belongings and leave. Vivian, rushing in her luxury car, tried to argue, but the officer silenced her with the words, "Federal crime." For the first time in years, I stood not as a victim, but as the rightful owner of my home, my dignity, my legacy. Shock had turned into explosive satisfaction and now into rising power. When the door finally slammed behind Vanessa and Vivian, silence filled the house. But it was not the silence of oppression. It was the silence of liberation. Daniel sat at the table, head in his hands, sobbing. "How could I be so blind, Mom? How could I let her do this to you?" I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Because son love can blind the best of us. What matters is that you see now, and that you choose differently." His tears fell freely, and for the first time I saw the boy I had raised, the one who still carried my blood, my values deep down. I tell you this, dear listener, not because the journey was easy, but because it was necessary. Sometimes life strips us, bare shakes us, until the walls fall only so we can rebuild stronger than before. If you've ever felt erased, underestimated, or betrayed, know this truth has a way of surfacing. And if this story stirs something in you, let your heart decide, tap the like button. Not for me, but to remind yourself that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always worth standing for. The slam of the door still echoed in my ears long after Vanessa and Vivian were gone. My house was mine again. My dignity had returned. But the storm inside these walls was far from over. Daniel sat slumped at the kitchen table, his eyes swollen from tears, his hands trembling against the wood. He whispered, "Mom, I was blind. She used me. She used you." And I let it happen. I wanted to comfort him, but the truth could no longer be hidden under soft words. The time had come to rip away every veil, to lay bare the bleeding core of what Vanessa had done. And in that brutal honesty, I knew both of us would face pain so sharp it could hardly be endured. From the folder of evidence, I pulled out the recordings Richard had copied for me. "Daniel," I said firmly, "you need to hear all of it." I pressed play. Vanessa's voice poured from the small speaker, dripping with contempt. "Daniel's like putty in my hands. He does whatever I want. I'll get the house, the accounts, everything. Once I'm pregnant, his mother's out. And when I've secured enough, I'll leave him for someone better." Each sentence was a knife plunged into my son's chest. His face twisted, his breath hitched, as if the air itself had turned against him. He clutched his shirt, gasping, "Stop, Mom, please stop." But I didn't stop, because this was the suffocating pain he had to feel to finally understand. When the tape ended, the silence was unbearable. Daniel collapsed forward, his forehead against the table, sobbing like the boy I had once held after his father abandoned us. But this time, no lullaby could soothe him. The truth was too raw, too poisonous. Just as Daniel tried to collect himself, Richard arrived with something unexpected. He carried a small USB drive. "Margaret," he said gravely, "one of our investigators placed a hidden camera in the living room weeks ago, with legal clearance after your consent. The footage may be difficult to watch, but Daniel deserves to see it." My stomach clenched. I had almost forgotten about that decision. Richard plugged the drive into my laptop. The video flickered on. There was Vanessa pacing the very room where we now sat, her phone at her ear. "Mom," she said to Vivian once Margaret is out, "I'll redesign this place. Her ugly curtains are the first to go. Daniel won't fight me, he never does. He's too weak, too desperate for affection." Daniel flinched at his own mention. His knuckles whitened on the edge of the table. Then Vanessa's tone hardened. "Honestly, I can't stand him. He's spineless. But once I get half of everything in a divorce, I'll finally move up in the world." The footage ended. The silence that followed was explosive in its own way. Daniel leapt to his feet, his voice breaking into a scream. "She called me spineless. After everything, after I gave her my heart." He slammed his fist against the wall, the sound reverberating like thunder. His fury filled the house, raw and uncontained. The truth had ripped him open. Pain suffocated him, and fury long buried erupted. Daniel turned toward me, his eyes bloodshot, his chest heaving. "Mom, how do you even look at me? I chose her over you. I let her humiliate you in your own home." He fell to his knees beside my chair, clutching my hands with desperate strength. "Tell me I'm not beyond forgiveness. Please." I stroked his hair, my own tears falling freely. "Son, forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it lets us move forward. You were blinded by love and lies. Now your eyes are open." He pressed his forehead against my lap, his body shaking with sobs. In that moment, I felt both a mother's agony and a strange, blazing relief. The poison had been drawn out. The wound was open, but healing could finally begin. Just as the air began to settle, headlights cut across the curtains. Vivian Marlowe had returned, alone this time. She entered with a calculated calm, her designer coat draped perfectly, her perfume heavy in the air. "Margaret," she said, her voice syrupy, "we don't have to escalate this. You've made your point. Let's settle quietly. No more lawsuits, no more public spectacle. It's not good for Daniel's reputation." I rose slowly from my chair, every nerve on fire. "You think this is about reputation, Vivian? This is about survival, dignity, justice." Her mask slipped and her eyes narrowed into steel. "Be careful. My family has influence. Do you really want to see your name dragged through courts and newspapers?" Before I could answer, Daniel exploded, "Get out, Vivian. You and your daughter destroyed everything. I never want to see either of you again." His roar shook the room. Vivian recoiled, stunned by the fury of the man she had once dismissed as weak. For the first time, I saw my son's spine straighten, his voice unshakable. After she left, Daniel paced like a caged animal. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. "I want her punished, Mom. Not just gone punished. For every word she said about you, for every scheme she spun around me." I watched him torn between fear for his rage and pride in his awakening. He had finally shed the blindness, finally tasted the fire of truth. "Son," I said quietly, "let the law handle the punishment. Our fury must be controlled, or it will consume us." He stopped breathing hard, then collapsed back into the chair. His eyes still burned, but now with a new light, the light of a man reborn through fury. That night, as we sat together in silence, I realized how much had changed in just a few hours. Truth had torn away every mask. Pain had suffocated us, pressed against our lungs until we could hardly breathe. Fury had erupted like fire through dry brush. But in that storm, something stronger was forged: resilience, clarity, and the faint glimmer of renewal. And so, dear listener, I must pause here, because what you've just heard is not just a story of betrayal. It is a story of masks ripped away, of pain that nearly crushed us, and fury that gave birth to strength. But let me ask you something. Does the way I've told it hold your attention? Is this voice carrying the weight, the fire, the truth, in a way that grips you? If the answer is no, press 0. If the answer is yes, if the voice drew you into the heart of the storm, press 1. The night after Vivian stormed away, silence settled over the house like a heavy quilt. But it wasn't the suffocating silence of shame anymore. It was a silence filled with anticipation, the pause before the gavel of justice came down. Daniel sat with his head bowed, his eyes red but determined. He had crossed the line between blindness and awakening. He had seen the truth, felt the pain, and tasted fury. Now came the part where fury turned into action, where justice would no longer be a dream, but a reality. The next morning, just after sunrise, a knock rattled the door. When I opened it, a uniformed officer stood tall with a stack of papers. His voice was firm but respectful. "Mrs. Hale, we're here to serve legal summons to Mrs. Vanessa Price and Mrs. Vivian Marlowe. May we enter?" Daniel watched from the hallway, his jaw tight as I nodded. The officer placed the documents carefully on the table. They are to appear in court for charges of fraudulent transfer coercion and misuse of assets. And until the matter is settled, all property and accounts are under your legal control. Hearing those words was like breathing for the first time after years underwater. A rush of pure, unfiltered victory coursed through me. Daniel whispered almost reverently, "Mom, you did it." But there was more. Following the officer was a woman with a notepad and a press badge pinned to her coat. She introduced herself as Claire Reynolds, a local investigative journalist. "I've been following reports about fraudulent property transfers in Seattle," she said. "Your case is explosive. It could expose a network of similar scams. Would you be willing to go on record for a moment?" I hesitated. My private pain had already been turned into public spectacle by Vanessa's cruel posts. Did I want more eyes watching? Then I thought about all the neighbors, the other mothers, the elderly women like me, who might be vulnerable to predators in their own families. And I realized this wasn't only about me anymore. "Yes," I said firmly, "the truth deserves to be seen." Claire's pen scratched furiously as she took notes. She promised to publish the story once the case reached court. The thrill of victory grew sharper, brighter. Justice wasn't just being done, it was about to be witnessed. 2 weeks later, the courthouse buzzed with reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers. Daniel walked beside me, his shoulders squared for the first time in years. Inside, Vanessa sat in expensive heels and a trembling facade. Vivian clutched her handbag like a shield. Richard Lawson stood tall, calm as a mountain. His voice cut through the courtroom like steel. "Your Honor, this is not just a case of family disagreement. This is fraud, coercion, and psychological abuse of a widow who worked her whole life to build her estate. These defendants attempted to strip her of everything. Then came the evidence recordings, screenshots, the anonymous letter, and finally the hidden camera footage. When Vanessa's own voice echoed through the speakers, Daniel's like putty in my hands. I'll divorce him once I get half." The courtroom gasped audibly. Vivian's face drained of color. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, but the damage was done. I sat there spine straight, savoring every second. It wasn't petty revenge, it was the exhilarating, righteous thrill of justice, finally dragging deceit into the light. The judge leaned forward, his voice steady. "The evidence is overwhelming. The contracts transferring property are hereby voided. Full ownership reverts to Margaret Hale. Furthermore, Mrs. Price and Mrs. Marlowe will face criminal investigation for fraudulent loans taken against property they did not own." A shudder ran through the courtroom. Vanessa gasped, "That's not fair. He's my husband I deserve." The judge's gavel struck hard. Silence. "Mrs. Price, you deserve nothing earned through deceit." It was a crushing moment not only for Vanessa, but for Vivian, who shrank in her chair, her carefully built image crumbling under the weight of public disgrace. And I felt it. The thrill, the satisfaction, the intoxicating knowledge that after years of humiliation, I had not only survived, I had triumphed. When we stepped outside, cameras flashed. Claire Reynolds, the journalist, asked the first question, "Mrs. Hale, what would you say to women watching who feel powerless in their own families?" I looked straight into the lens, unflinching. Never let anyone convince you that you're powerless. Your voice matters, your dignity matters, and the truth will always find a way. Even if it takes years, justice can prevail. The crowd erupted in applause. Neighbors who once whispered pity now shouted encouragement. Strangers clapped me on the back. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "Mom, I've never been prouder." That moment wasn't just victory, it was rebirth. News spread fast. Vanessa became the face of greed and betrayal in the local press. Her social media accounts flooded with condemnation. Vivian's salons began losing clients overnight. Their empire of appearances collapsed like a sandcastle in the tide. One evening, as Daniel and I shared dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You may have won in court, Margaret, but this isn't over. V." I stared at it, then laughed. For the first time in years, I laughed freely, because her words had no teeth anymore. Her power had been crushed, her lies exposed. The gavel had fallen, and it was final. Later that night, as I walked through my house, the house that was once again fully mine, I ran my fingers across the walls. Every picture frame, every worn chair, every scar on the wooden floor was a monument to survival. The humiliation was gone, replaced by a fierce pride. Justice wasn't abstract anymore. It had a sound, a taste, a thrill. It was the gavel's echo, the gasps of the courtroom, the headlines in the paper. I had not only defended my home, I had crushed the enemy on her own battlefield. And so, dear listener, remember, this victory doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it takes years of silent endurance, careful planning, and a moment of courage to unleash it. But when it arrives, when justice finally stands tall, the feeling is like nothing else. The thrill of victory, the revelation of truth, the crushing of deceit beneath your feet. The courthouse victory should have been the end. The gavel had fallen, the truth had thundered across the room, and justice was mine. Reporters had praised my resilience. Neighbors treated me like a heroine. But when the doors closed and the cameras disappeared, the silence of my home returned not heavy with shame this time, but aching with the weight of what remained broken. Daniel. In the days after court, my son drifted through the house like a ghost. He fixed the leaky faucet, carried groceries, even repainted the porch railings, tasks he once ignored, but none of it carried joy. His shoulders hunched with invisible chains, and his eyes, once bright, were clouded by shame. One night, I found him in the kitchen long past midnight, staring at a cold cup of coffee. "Daniel," I whispered. He didn't look at me. His voice cracked, "Mom, I can't forgive myself." I handed her the knife and watched her stab you with it. I let her humiliate you, take your house, twist my mind until I treated you like a burden. His words cut deeper than Vanessa's insults ever had, because they came not from malice, but from his own heart tearing itself apart. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Son guilt is a heavy stone. You can carry it forever, or you can set it down. What matters is what you do now. But his eyes brimmed with tears. You deserved better than the son I've been. The next morning, as I sorted through boxes in the attic reclaiming corners of my house Vanessa had once mocked, I found something I hadn't seen in decades: Daniel's childhood journal. Its cover was faded, the pages yellowed, but his crooked handwriting leapt out at me. "Today, Mom worked late again. I wanted to buy her flowers, but I don't have money. One day, I'll make her proud. Mom sewed my uniform even though her fingers hurt. I'll never forget it." I carried the journal downstairs, placed it in front of him, and said, "Read." He hesitated, but as his eyes scanned those childish words, his lips trembled. "I wrote this." "Yes," I said softly. "This is who you were, who you still are." Vanessa buried it under lies, but she couldn't kill it. Daniel broke down, clutching the journal to his chest like a lifeline. "I was that boy once, and I lost him." "No," I told him, my own tears spilling. "You're finding him again." The following Sunday, Daniel sat across from me at the dining table where so many battles had once been fought. He held my gaze with a courage I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "Mom, I need to confess something," he said. "There were moments when Vanessa mocked you, when she dismissed you. I felt it was wrong. Deep down, I knew. But I stayed silent, because silence was easier than standing up to her. And now that silence eats me alive." I inhaled slowly, steadying my heart. Daniel's silence is not unforgivable, but you must learn from it. If you remain silent now after seeing the truth, that would be unforgivable. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not that weak man anymore." 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar Vanessa's. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Margaret. You probably hate me. I don't blame you. Losing everything has forced me to look in a mirror I've avoided all my life. I see now the monster I became. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know I regret the way I treated you and Daniel. If nothing else, I hope the pain I caused will teach me never to inflict it again." I read it twice, then handed it to Daniel. His reaction was a mixture of rage and sorrow. She has no right to ask for forgiveness after all she did. Yet, when I folded the letter, I felt something unexpected. Not sympathy, Not reconciliation, but a calm understanding that vengeance had already run its course. Vanessa was left to battle the only judge she couldn't escape: her conscience. That evening, as Daniel and I walked through the garden we'd reclaimed together, he asked Mom, "Do you forgive her?" I paused, brushing soil from my hands. Forgiveness isn't for her, it's for us. If I carry hate, it poisons me. I don't excuse what she did, and I'll never welcome her back. But I refuse to let her live rent-free in my soul. Daniel's voice cracked. "I wish I had your strength." "You will," I said, touching his arm. "Strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from rising after the fall." For the first time, I saw his shoulders straighten, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. Over the next months, Daniel and I rebuilt not only the house, but our bond. We cooked meals together, laughing at burnt pies and uneven spice. He repaired the fence while I planted roses. The house once filled with venom grew warm with love again. Sometimes guilt still haunted his eyes, but I reminded him gently, "Don't let yesterday's shadows block today's sunlight." He began volunteering at a local shelter, helping young men find jobs. One evening, he told me, "It feels like I'm atoning not just for myself, but for all the ways I let her strip me of who I was." I smiled through tears. "And that, son, is the greatest proof of your change. The courtroom had given me justice, yes, but here in the quiet evenings with Daniel, I discovered something greater: the nobility of forgiveness. Guilt had nearly crushed him. Sorrow had nearly broken me. But forgiveness, the choice to release hatred, gave both of us new life. I realized that justice alone doesn't heal wounds. Only love does. So if you, dear listener, have carried guilt or nursed sorrow, remember this: justice is important, but forgiveness is the medicine that keeps the heart alive. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can choose how it shapes our future. Spring came early that year, as though the earth itself knew it was time for renewal. The garden Daniel and I had reclaimed from neglect began to bloom with roses, tulips, and lavender. Each morning the fragrance drifted into the kitchen, replacing the stale bitterness that had once haunted these walls. The house felt lighter, as if every room had been washed clean, not just of Vanessa's cruelty, but of the shadows that had clung to me for years. I stood at the window one morning, coffee warm in my hand, watching Daniel kneel among the flowers. His back was straight, his movements calm. For the first time in years, he no longer looked like a man broken by shame. He looked like a son, reborn. And in that moment, I realized our story was not only one of betrayal and justice. It was one of cleansing, of peace, glowing after the storm, and of hope, awakening like spring blossoms after a long, harsh winter. Every corner of my home now told a story of triumph. The living room, once a stage for humiliation, now held laughter and conversation. The kitchen, where Vanessa had once mocked my homey cooking, now smelled of stews and pies Daniel helped prepare with genuine delight. At night, when I sat in my armchair, the silence was no longer heavy. It was radiant. A silence that spoke of dignity restored, of wounds slowly closing, of a heart no longer under siege. It was as if the house itself had been baptized, every brick scrubbed of venom, every wall glowing with new light. Daniel carried guilt still, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, it transformed into purpose. He volunteered at the shelter twice a week, guiding young men who reminded him of himself. One evening, as we walked through the garden, he said, "Mom, I used to think strength meant never needing anyone, but I see now real strength is admitting your mistakes and choosing to change." I smiled, the fading sun warming my face. And that sun is how you turn ashes into soil. From pain grows something new. His voice was steady. "I want to live the rest of my life proving that I've learned." In that moment, I felt the full cleansing. His heart was no longer chained to shame. He was free. And so was I. Months passed, and life found a rhythm of peace. One Sunday, Daniel introduced me to someone new, Fiona Kessler, an elementary school teacher. She entered my home not with arrogance but with humility, asking softly, "Mrs. Hale, would you teach me the stew Daniel loves so much? He told me it's tied to his childhood." Her words melted years of hurt. She wasn't trying to erase me, but to honor me. In her presence, I felt no threat, only the possibility of a family built on respect. It was another sign that hope had been restored. Vanessa's final letter sat in my drawer, her apologies mingled with excuses. Sometimes I took it out, reading the lines where she admitted regret, but I never wrote back. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness is choosing peace for yourself, even if the other person never truly understands. The true punishment for Vanessa was not my hatred. It was her own conscience left to wrestle with what she had done. Dear listener, if you've followed me this far, I want you to hear the lesson clearly. Betrayal can scar you, but it does not have to define you. Injustice can wound you, but it does not have to chain you. The cleansing comes when you decide to stand for truth, to forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Life will hand us storms, but storms, no matter how violent, always end. And when they do, the air is fresher, the sky brighter, the soil richer. Justice gave me back my home. Forgiveness gave me back my heart. And hope gave me back my future. I share this not just as a story of my family, but as a reminder for yours. We all carry battles unseen. We all face voices that try to silence or belittle us. But we also carry within us the power to rise to cleanse our lives of poison and to plant seeds of peace where once there was only pain. And for that, I thank you from the deepest part of my heart for listening to my journey. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to know. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, your own story of resilience, or simply a word of encouragement for others who may be listening. If you haven't yet subscribed to join me for more stories of justice, forgiveness, and hope. And don't forget to like this video, it helps others find their way to these lessons too. This is Auntie May 365 Voice, and I'll see you in the next video.